Next session. Thanks again for being here at the Chillmark Book Festival, which, as we keep reminding you, is a volunteer and nonprofit and for free experience, but boy, would we love your financial support. You can make contributions over there at the information tent, and we will hear right now from the wonderful Alyssa Mastromonaco, who was President Obama's, basically his minder for his many years of leadership, and she's going to be interviewed by Ashley Parker, who she did a special early morning presentation for us panel. She's the White House correspondent for the Washington Post, so she knows what it looks like. We got inside and inside of the White House. Thank you.
So I thought we could start by trying to endear ourselves to this crowd, so I was going to ask you to say something nice about Donald Trump.
There's so I'm very aware, and I always have been, that politics is like a pendulum and it swings back and forth, and there are Democrats and Republicans. But the one thing that's usually pretty constant is a deep belief in public service. Can you hear? Is this better? Yeah. Okay, sorry. Is that everyone who has been president so far has a deep belief in public service, so you can kind of get behind the fact that they really want what they at least believe is best for America, and believe in the people who have worked there, administration over administration, and these guys don't. And it's a real bummer, because it's literally the only nice thing I could try to say, but I can't even say that.
So the reason I'm interviewing her, actually, we've never met before.
No, she's like famous. I know.
I have read her book and I loved it and I highly recommend it. But the reason I'm interviewing her is because you specifically requested a female interviewer, which I thought was really cool.
Thank you.
But I wanted to ask, I've never had that before. I've never heard of that, so I just wanted you to talk about it.
So most men get a little uncomfortable about some of the things in my book, and the things that make people most uncomfortable are actually the best parts of the book, and I knew that Ashley would go there, and also I just like women, so yeah.
So I guess that is a good segue into, I was going to ask you to tell the story of the Alyssa Mastromonaco Memorial Tampon Dispenser in the West Wing.
So it's pretty funny, because the real point of the story, so we had been in the West Wing for probably 3 years at this point, and there was sort of like a secret society of women that had tampons in their drawers. And you could go if you needed one and just take it out. And like all the assistants knew, you just like let someone in to go into the top right drawer for a tampon. And one day, there were none. And we were going to a dinner with every couple of months, all the female cabinet secretaries and senior women in the White House would go out for a fun dinner. And we were going out for dinner, and I said, I should probably run to CVS, but I didn't. And so we were at the dinner, and my dear friend Kathy Rumler, who was the president's lawyer, she was White House counsel, I said, Kath, I had that moment, like we were all sitting at the table laughing and having dinner. I'm like, Kath, I think that I've had an accident. And she was like, you have. And so she scooted me out. She wrapped my jacket around my waist and scooted me out. And so the next day, I went into the office, and I asked the woman who runs the Office of Administration, I'm like, Katie, is there any reason there's not a tampon machine in the West Wing bathroom? And she's like, I don't know. And so the real point of the story is that sometimes you just have to ask what appears to be a stupid question, because it was just that nobody had ever thought about it before. But within a week, there was a proper tampon dispenser in the West Wing. I don't know if it still works, but we put it up and we announced it in front of everybody, and everyone got super uncomfortable except for the women. So yeah, it was awesome.
But that seemed to be a good example of just by having a woman in the room, or a woman's perspective, where something got covered that might not have otherwise, not by any malintent, just because there wasn't that perspective. So I was curious if there were other examples of having a female presence in a meeting or on a policy debate sort of help tweak it in a different way.
Well, one of my favorite stories is we had we were having a meeting about reproductive rights. And like the men were just super comfortable talking about what they thought should be appropriate. And we were like taken aback. We're like, why are you opining on whether I should have rights or not? But my favorite story, actually, because the best part of Barack Obama is that he really respected so many different viewpoints. And even though I was not a policy expert, we were having a meeting once about food stamps. And I was actually the only person in the room that had ever had any interaction with food stamps, because the grocery store I worked at in upstate New York was the only one for 75 miles that accepted food stamps. And so everyone was talking about it really theoretically. And I was like, well, wait, no, you don't know what it's like to see someone who comes through with just like a proper like a proper grocery basket, and then to be told that they can't have these things and then they can't afford those things. And I like looked those people in the face. And so even though I didn't go to Harvard and didn't have a policy background, Barack Obama turned around and he was like, listen to Alyssa. And so it's not specifically because I was a woman, but he really did encourage everyone to sort of speak up, even if it wasn't totally in their bailiwick, which is, I guess, why men felt fine opining on reproductive rights.
And I will move off of gender questions in a second and into issues of bodily fluids. But
Totally.
There was an article that one of my colleagues wrote at the Washington Post about this thing that allegedly the women in the Obama White House did called amplification. And it kind of went viral, and it was just fascinating to women in all levels of Washington. And it was basically, you can tell it better, but this idea that if a woman said something in a meeting, spoke up in a meeting, she makes a contribution and the conversation kind of moves on, another woman would then bring up the point and credit her colleague for mentioning it in the first place. So I was curious if you could talk about, if that was real and what that was like, and also the reaction to that article.
I was surprised that people were as interested in that article. I mean, I kind of thought it was like a fluffy throwaway, but people were really into it. And for us, it was more that we'd be sitting in a room, and like I have a very strong and forceful voice now with you guys, but sometimes I'd be a bit meek and I'd say, oh, what about this? And Kathy Rumler or Valerie Jarrett was like huge on this. They would be the ones who'd be like, wait, stop, did you hear what Alyssa said? Or if Kathy was making a point, Tina Chen, who was the First Lady's chief of staff, would say, wait, I'm sorry, did you guys hear what they said? That was Alyssa's idea. And then sort of like the one thing we really did, which they didn't talk about as much, is that everything moves so quickly in the White House that you can have meetings and sometimes like not have the right people in the room. And the one thing that we really did was always be like, well, wait a minute, shouldn't Kathy be in this meeting? Let's hold on and pull Kathy in. And so we kind of looked out for each other that way too.
And were you surprised at what a chord it struck? I mean, I felt like all women in Washington were sort of talking about that phenomenon.
No, I actually was really... I mean, it was one of those things like I talked to, it was Juliet, wasn't it? Yeah, I talked to Juliet in like June, and that article came out, and I'd forgotten I had talked to her, and I'm like, wait a minute, what did I say? So yeah, but everybody really did talk about it, and a lot of news outlets wanted to interview me, and I said, I'm not going to take credit for it. We all did it, but no, people were really, and people have emailed me and tweeted at me saying that they read it and they do it now, and that it's super helpful.
And one of your jobs, or a key part of your job, if I understand it correctly, in the White House was very logistical in capacity and making sure all of these things that we see that seem wonderful, whether it's a state dinner or the Easter egg roll or getting all these foreign leaders to Nelson Mandela's funeral, go off without a hitch. But I was wondering, what is the sort of stuff that no one ever sees that goes on behind the scenes?
Oh, sure. I'll tell my favorite story. So my favorite story, which if you've read the book, I have a cat whose name is Shrummy, and he's named after Bob Shrum, who I'm sure you all know. And Shrummy was quite sick, and he was at the vet hospital, and I was with him, and we were leaving that night to go to Pretoria for Nelson Mandela's funeral. And so I am sitting there in the in the animal hospital, and the attending nurse is like, I'm like, you have to tell me, I can't leave and not know what's wrong with him. And she's like, well, where are you going? And I'm like, Nelson Mandela's funeral. And she looked at me like completely taken aback. And I'm like, well, we weren't friends. Like, I'm just going because he is, because I work for Barack Obama. And so this was the stuff that people don't see. So for Nelson Mandela's funeral, the government was completely overwhelmed because they had 300 DVs, dignified visitors, which are all, for us, it was all the former presidents, except for Jimmy Carter, and secretaries of state and the like. And so super, like the highest levels of security you can imagine. So I get on the plane after being with the vet, and President Bush is on, and Laura Bush is on, and Hillary Clinton was with us because President Clinton was meeting us in South Africa. And I was on the phone with the advance team, and they said, Alyssa, we have a problem. The South Africans won't let our weapons in. they won't let the Secret Service weapons in. And I was like, well, we're not getting off the plane unless the weapons are in. And so I told President Bush and President Obama as we were, and Michelle, as we were getting ready to land, we can't, I need you guys on my side. We can't do anything until they let the weapons off. And POTUS Obama, is like, it's fine. We just have to get going. And President Bush, I was like, you have to back me up because we're not getting off the plane. And so we get off the plane. Finally, they let the weapons in. And we're driving. And normally, it's like, as people on Martha's Vineyard, that when Barack Obama's moving around, all the roads stop and it's super annoying, except that they didn't shut the roads down. So we're creeping along with every person of import in America on a crowded highway. And I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna die. Oh my God, we're gonna die. And we finally get to the hold room, in the hotel, and Bill Clinton had beat us there, and he had a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter. And as George Bush gets off the elevator, he's like, George, you want peanut butter and bread? And he was like, I do. And I was like, what are we doing? This is crazy. And so we finally get going to the venue where it's happening, and it's weird because you'd think it would be like super formal, but it really had like the vibes of a bad DNC convention. And we're trying to get in, and they let President Obama and President Bush in, but all of the guards like linked arms and wouldn't let me through. And POTUS turns around, he's like, we'll come back for you. And I was like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? And so finally President Bush sent someone to fetch me, and John Lewis was trapped outside in like a parka because it was pouring rain. And we were just glad we got out of there alive, basically. So that's the stuff that people don't know, that like even though you're president, like countries totally fuck with you just to fuck with you. And you just have to deal with it and you have to roll, so.
And so this story was one of my favorite in the book, and it's also very near and dear to my heart because as a reporter you face a little bit of this. I was just in Eastern Europe with Mike Pence.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the things is when you're a reporter, you are stuck in what is called like a pool hold or a pool van, which means you're traveling with these people, but you are stuck in a van with other members of the press corps. You're not seeing anything. And the key thing is there is no bathroom. It is so hard to find access to bathrooms. And so when I went on this trip with Mike Pence, I've been in too many pool vans where someone has gotten like violently sick to their stomach. So I had plastic bags if necessary.
My girl.
And I had like a case of Imodium, but you write very vividly about your irritable bowel syndrome.
Yeah, because it has to be written about.
In a particular incident with the Pope, and so I was hoping you could just recount it.
Yeah. So, true story. We were in Rome, and we were going to have an audience with Pope Francis. And, when you're with the president, he has a private audience, and then about 5 other people are permitted to go in and also have an audience with the Pope. And my last name is Mastromonaco. Everyone assumed I'm Catholic. I'm not, but I took advantage of the opportunity. And so that morning, the other thing is Ashley says, you never know when there's a bathroom. You also never know when your next meal is going to be.
Also true.
Very true. So that morning we get up, and Susan Rice and I are having our mantillas put on our heads, and Susan's like super annoyed. She's like, why do we have to wear these? And so as we're doing this, I'm like, I'm so hungry. And so I went down to the little restaurant in our hotel, and all they really had that was like quick to go were scrambled eggs. And so I ate the scrambled eggs, not realizing they were made with cream. And I'm lactose intolerant and also have IBS. And the worst thing about IBS, and the reason I talk about it, is because sometimes the stress of knowing you have it can trigger it. And so, and so Dan Pfeiffer, and I see a lot of like friends of the pod, so who know Pfeiffer. Pfeiffer was my traveling bro, and he knew that when we would eat certain things, he'd be like, buddy, are you okay? Like, are you going to be okay? And so I had my eggs, but Pfeiffer wasn't there to stop me. And we get in the van to go to the Vatican. And he's like, buddy, you don't look good. You're sweating. I was like, it's not good. It's not good. My stomach. He's like, you can't shit on the Pope. And I was like, I know. I'm like, stop saying that. I'm like, I know it. Vividly, I know this. And so we get up there, and John Kerry's there because he's meeting the Pope too. And we're all in this beautiful ante room, like waiting to go in, and I find the very best part of working in the White House is the White House medical unit. And so my doctor for 6.5 years was also the president's doctor, and he was there. I said, Ronnie, it's not good. And he's like, is it your tummy? I'm like, it's my tummy. And so he found the super duper strength Imodium. And then we looked around, there was no water. We're like, oh my God, I can't like take dry Imodium. And so we don't know how, but someone came back with a very small cup of water, and I didn't poop on the Pope. So I don't know if it was holy water or what it was, but I was super glad for it.
So at the end of your book, you write about how there's some politicians, you said largely female, who you could see yourself getting pulled back in to work for. And I sort of assumed it was on a presidential level again.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't even know. We actually had a very interesting conversation with David Plouffe, where we were at John Favreau's wedding up in Maine, and we were talking, and we're like, you know what? Maybe we all, for the next presidential, just have to go back to the core, like our core competency. And so maybe I just go back and run like the state of Wisconsin or like the scheduling and advance team again, and just go back and crush, you know, what we really know, kind of like Ocean's 11 vibes. Like you just all get together. But no, I really thought that Hillary would win and that we could skip off into the sunset and like write books and just, you know, contribute some money and knock on some doors. And, you know, now I'm like, I've lost weight from marching, so that's good. But yeah.
But who are, I mean, you signed on with Obama incredibly early when he was a senator, right? Like a charismatic up-and-coming senator, but nobody thought he was going to run for president.
That's why I worked for him, because I'd been working for John Kerry, and we lost. And it's so devastating. Like, it's devastating in every way. And I was like, this guy, he's like 42. He's from Illinois. He's a junior senator. I can go work for him because he'll never run for president. 2 years later, I lived in Chicago.
But using that, you know, sort of preternatural like looking into the future, I guess who do you think, who would you bet on? This crowd seems potentially interested in knowing up and coming Democrats, who has a good shot, who's someone to watch?
So the thing that I always thought made me quite successful was that I only worked for people that I deeply believed in, so that you were there for the whole ride, not just to win. And if you lost, it sucked, but at least you were there for the right reasons, which is why, you know, working for Barack Obama was kind of a low-risk thing. But now, if I looked out, someone like Kirsten Gillibrand, who's my senator from New York, and was actually my congresswoman from upstate New York, like, I love her. I think she's super real and really cares and understands. I don't know if you guys heard this or not. I say it everywhere I go because I think it's so appalling. But a couple weeks ago, the DCCC said that they would no longer have a litmus test on reproductive rights, and that you could be a Democrat running and be anti-choice. And that is the wrong direction. That is absolutely the wrong direction for this party. And it's almost like they didn't learn anything from the last election. And so I have to say that everywhere I go so that we have our antennae up. Because if I hadn't seen that random story on Twitter, none of us would ever know. And I've been putting a lot of pressure, and NARAL has, on the DCCC to say, you're either a party of no litmus tests or you have litmus tests. You can't have the only one be reproductive rights. And as far as I'm concerned, you can be a Democrat and not believe in abortion for yourself, but you should let other people have the choice. And so I just had to say that.
So your book, if I understand correctly, has been optioned by Mindy Kaling.
Yeah, Mindy Kaling and I have a development deal.
So I was just curious, I mean, it seems really cool. Is it a TV show? Is it, like, what can you tell us about it? And also, what is that process like, where you're sort of relinquishing control of yourself and your image? And
it's actually the reason that Min and I did a development deal is because I don't relinquish that much control. So we're in the process of finding writers to write the pilot. And then, you know, we have interest already from Hulu and Amazon because her show is in its final season this year. So maybe it will replace it. Who knows?
And do you have a sense of who would play you?
No, I think it has to be someone totally different than me. I mean, out of respect for the Obamas and everything that we have all been through together, I would want it to be somewhat fictionalized so that nobody thinks it's like a portrayal of... I actually said we should almost do it like Home Improvement, where there is no president. He's just like a voice from beyond, but we'll see. We'll see what Mindy has in mind.
So my first job in journalism was I started as a research assistant to a columnist, and so I've made all manner of assistant-type mistakes, including booking non-refundable tickets to Paris I took us to the wrong airport on the wrong day. Like, I took us to LaGuardia on like April 7th, and we were supposed to have flown out of JFK on April 1st. So I was very interested. I don't think this was in your book, but I saw it in an article that you once booked a $30,000 private plane
For the wrong day.
For the wrong day.
Yeah. But like didn't know it until so President Obama, well, he was Senator Obama then, and he was traveling in 2006 for the midterms, and he was going back to back to back, and his book had just come out, and he had just come back from his first trip to Africa, which was like super newsworthy. And so he was cranking, and they're at the airport. I wasn't with them on this trip, and they're in Denver, and they're going to San Francisco, and I get a call from Robert Gibbs. He's like, hey, Alyssa, we're at Signature, and there's no plane. And we asked the dispatch, and they said there's no plane coming. I'm like, Gibbs, that's impossible. And so I called the charter company, and they're like, no, your plane's for tomorrow. And I just burst into tears because I pride myself on never making mistakes, and that was like a fairly terrible mistake. By the time I'd pulled myself together, Barack Obama had already booked them on a United flight out of the main terminal into San Francisco, getting them into the airport before the private plane actually would have. And they get on the United flight, and my phone rings. And I don't know if you guys, some of you may know Pete Rouse. He's here on the island, has been here for 100 years. And Pete knew that I was upset. And so he told Obama, he's like, look, Alyssa's really beating herself up about this mistake, this $30,000 mistake. And I get a phone call from Obama. Like back then, the cell phone was still the cell phone. So I knew it was him. And I was like, hello. He's like, I hear that there are some tears in the office over a plane, but I'm like super comfortable here in my my first class seat going to, because it was the only seat available, going to San Francisco. So I don't understand why there are any tears. And I was like, okay, thank you very much.
And then there's been
He's very forgiving, yeah.
There's been a lot of discussion about leakers and who leaks and why. And it seems very prevalent this administration in a way it wasn't before. And I was just curious if you could talk about, and not sort of like the intel community deep state leaks, but yeah, just to, something interesting happened in the Oval Office or someone's trying to get a point of view across. So in the Obama administration, or someone who's worked in an administration, who is the type of person who leaks? Why do people leak? And what did you guys do to try to ferret it out?
Sure. So mostly people leak if a decision has been made that they don't agree with. And instead of dealing, because it's part of the job that you don't always win, they try to get their way by leaking to the press and backing the president or someone else in the administration into a corner. That's usually why. We didn't do that. Like, I can't tell you, the first time I went to a White House Correspondents' Dinner was with Lynn Sweet from the Chicago Sun-Times, who was like notoriously sort of like not gossipy, but like she really gets in there. And I was so afraid of being considered a leaker that I didn't have one drink. So much so, but it was so I was so quiet the whole time because I was afraid of saying anything wrong that she looked at me and she's like, how drunk are you? And I was like, I haven't had a drink. We never would have. There were literally almost no leaks, I think, ever from the administration because we supported the president and his ability to make the decisions that he wanted to make. And right now, I actually don't believe that the leaks that are coming out are entirely malicious. I actually think that a lot of the leaks are from people who are deeply concerned about the decisions that are being made, and they almost view it as like their patriotic duty to leak. Because they're insane things that we wouldn't have known. Like, I couldn't believe that they leaked the transcripts of foreign leader calls. Like, I wouldn't have even known how to access that, like, in the White House. I'd have no idea. But at the same time, you see that he threatened two foreign leaders who are two of our very best allies and then lied about it. And, like, someone must have thought that we should know that there was a lot of lying going on. And it's unfortunate, but I think that's why the leaking is happening now.
And I was also very interested in a section of your book when you leave the White House and you're interviewing for your first job sort of outside of politics with Vice, and they ask you to come back and say the dollar amount that your salary should be, and you do that, and you say...
Don't ever do that.
Yes. So I wanted to see if you could, to make sure this Martha's Vineyard crowd understands how to get their full net worth, give some tips on... salary negotiations.
So I was so precious in my negotiation. I was like, everything they say is wrong with women. I went for my interview. Like, I went and I met Shane Smith, who's just like larger than life. And I was in Williamsburg, and I'm in the office, right? And there are like 15 people in the waiting room. And he comes out and he's like, "You must be Alyssa." And I was like, wow, I'm the squarest person in this lobby. And that's how he picked me out of the crowd. And so we had our moments together. And then he said, "You know what? I think we should do this." And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "We'll connect with you on the points of the deal." And I was like, I'm not going to use a lawyer. I don't want them to think I'm that kind of person. Huge mistake. Huge mistake. I had no idea. When you're in government, everything's so transparent. You know what everybody's salary is. Like, you never have to really negotiate for anything. And so they said to me, "What do you think you should make?" I was like, shit. And I had like a bunch of speaking events booked. And so I kind of added them all up in my head. And I was like, well, this is what I have booked for the year that I'd have to give up to come work here. So you should pay me this. And then they came back with 50% of that. And I had terrible self-esteem after. I'm like, oh my God, all the guys leave. And like Jim Messina's making millions of dollars and no one wants to pay me. When really, when they asked me what I thought I should have said, "I'm sure there's a salary range for this job, and I would expect to be at the very top of it." That's what I should have said. I know that now. I wrote about it in the book, so nobody else makes that mistake. But and I'm still not great at it, but at least I use my own words, and I'm like, I think I should be at the top end of the salary range. That's my only tip. I can't give you anything else because I'm still not that good.
And then one thing in the book that you capture really well is kind of this is not quite the best word, but the schizophrenia of working in the White House. And so one telling example I thought was you got engaged right before you went on the president's trip to Hawaii, and on Air Force One, you have the president and the first lady toasting your engagement. But then the flip side of that is you spend the entire Christmas not with your family, locked in a hotel room, dealing with the fiscal cliff crisis.
Yeah, it was terrible.
So just what are those kind of like higher than high highs and lower than low lows like, and how did you kind of cosmically balance that dichotomy?
So you kind of, and this is sort of why I think that the Trump folks need to shift their mentality a bit, because we never felt sorry for ourselves. You know, it's kind of like your duty. Like my husband, we got engaged before I went because I love Christmas. I love Christmas very much. And it was the first year I wouldn't be in Rhinebeck, New York for Christmas with my parents. And I was really devastated about it. And so he decided that we would get engaged before Christmas instead of after, so I'd have something to feel good about while I was there. And so we get on the plane, and the first lady pops some champagne, and she's like, "Let's celebrate." And it was really nice. And then you land, and the time difference, as Ashley knows, that when you travel with POTUS, the world still continues in Eastern time. And so we were busy confirming Chuck Hagel to be Secretary of Defense at that time. And you may remember there was a bit of like hullabaloo around that one. And so my daily conference call was at 4 a.m. And I would get up, I'd have my coffee, I'd do my conference call, take a little siesta, and then, you know, kind of go about my day. But I never really felt sorry. None of us ever really were like, woe is us, you know, it's really sad. Also, the advance team decorated my room for Christmas, which was really nice. But that's the kind of stuff that we did to keep each other going. Like, I didn't ask them to do it. I just got into my hotel room and was feeling a little like sad and floppy. And there was like a Christmas tree and lights. And that's just sort of, we always tried to know when the other person needed a lift, and you kind of tried to give them a lift. So you didn't have to lift yourself all the time.
And I should say at the outset, I am not a cat person, so this may have colored my understanding of this section, but there was a deeply tragic, but also I thought quite funny section about the death of her cat. And one thing you spoke about, so the cat is, as she mentioned before, is sick on the trip to Nelson Mandela's funeral, and she's on the plane, and you find yourself talking to former President Bush about Shrummi's
best guy
in appetescence. But what I was struck by was that later President Bush comes back on the plane, and in addition to asking you some logistical things, he asks you how your cat is doing and what you're hearing from the vet. And I was wondering, are there any other, especially Republicans or politicians you've come in contact with who are surprisingly warm or compassionate or real people that we might not realize?
So I have two good stories.
Name names.
So one, I'm going to name names. So one, President Bush, he came back and he's like, how's your cat? And I was like, he's eating again. It's really good. But John McCain, So I don't know if you guys, like when John McCain, when the news came out that he was sick, one of the things that I did was I went back and I listened to his concession speech from 2008. And if you haven't done that in a while, you should, because it is exactly what America is about. And it's one of the most beautiful, like, patriotic speeches ever. And after we win, it's pretty customary to have, whoever the loser is come and meet with the president-elect. And so John McCain came to Chicago to meet with President-elect Obama, and we said, we'll get you a car service to pick you up. And he's like, don't you have like a driver like with a minivan? And so one of the guys that worked for me went and picked him up, and he was supposed to have lunch with President Obama, and he said, you know what? I know we're going to talk, and I'm really hungry, so can we stop and get a burger? And he was just like super nice. But the other person, I don't know if you guys remember Trent Lott from Mississippi. So during Hurricane Katrina, the Louisiana offices were way more overwhelmed than the Mississippi offices were. And Trent Lott was on the same floor as us in the Senate office. And so I went down to his office and I asked them if we could work with them to get stuff down to the Gulf Coast. And Louisiana was so overwhelmed that there was actually a church in Pascagoula, Mississippi. And this is actually a funny Barack Obama story. So we had UPS was going to transport our goods, Walgreens was going to provide our goods, and American Express was paying for the goods. And so we were doing a conference call to figure out everything that we should send down to Trent Lott's church. And I was in the office and Barack Obama was in his office, and we were real close together. And he comes out and he's like, conference me in. I've been reading about what people down there need and I want to make sure. And I'm like, no, like I've got this. We're good. And so he gets on the phone. I conference him in and he says, I've been reading that they need feminine products, bug spray, and diapers. And they're like, yeah. He goes, like maxi pads. They need maxi pads. And we were like, no, we heard you the first time. We're good. And so then Trent Lott came down, and he knew that I was the one coordinating everything, and he came down and personally thanked me. And a week later, after everything had arrived, and I got this big bouquet of flowers. And Senator Obama comes out, and he's like, oh, were those for me? And I was like, no, they're from me, and they're from Trent Lott. And I think I still have the card because I thought it was such a nice, gracious thing to do. And that's like really what government should be about. Like, you help each other.
And just one more question for you, and then we'll throw it out to the audience. But there's not that many women in the Trump administration, but they often occupy these high-profile kind of fine-line roles, like Ivanka. And she often takes credit for the more moderating stuff that happens, and when something negative happens, she's like, well, what do you expect? I can only do so much. But I was curious if you have A, any thoughts on her, but B, on Sarah Huckabee Sanders. She's not the first woman at the podium, but she's the first mother, I believe, and she often invokes her children. And I don't know, just what do you...
I would say, so Ivanka, I mean, girl, you're in for a dime, you're in for a dollar. Like, you don't get to belay the hokey pokey and stick your foot in and then take your foot out. Like, you just don't. You don't get to spend the government's money and redecorate an office, which I did not even know was a possibility. I was there for 6.5 years. And then just be like in Aspen or the Hamptons every time something shit goes down. So I have nothing to say about her. Sarah, I give like huge props to Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I feel like she was sort of promoted in a really like unceremonious way. It was just like, here, girl, and they like shot her out of a t-shirt gun to the podium. But she's really hardworking, and she can only do with what she's given. And so, on the one hand, you can say, well, if she knows that it's a lie, how can she get up there and do it? But I give her props, and she was a real public servant before that, and like, I think she's a good person.
Any questions?
She's a public servant, let's put it that way.
Yes, it's my recollection, going back to the early gender comments, that at one point there was sort of not a revolution, but a convening in the White House of women to meet with the president. Would you want to comment about that? They were talking about, as I understand it, about women's issues and some grievances, and Maybe you give us some insight on
Sure.
that.
So that was a pretty interesting moment for us. And there was a lot of chatter in the press about the fact that people thought that Larry Summers was a bit of a bully and that he was like steamrolling us and that we couldn't stand up to him. And the premise of those stories actually offended us because no one who was writing those stories ever asked the actual women in the West Wing how we felt and if we thought that that was true. It was just sort of like Washington gossip. And so the president convenes this dinner and it's all the ladies around a table and he's trying to be so like sensitive and be like, I'm here for you. And we were like, no, we get like 2 hours with you for dinner. We don't want to talk about like who we think is shitty. We want to like pick your brain and talk about what's going on. And so we actually all rebelled against even talking about those issues because they weren't that real to us. And so we figured you get an audience with the POTUS, you don't waste it. So that was our moment. But it was really reported on a very different way than what was actually happening.
Yeah. So my question is, sort of in the wake of these transcripts of Trump's conversations with world leaders, just in general, how scripted or how informal are presidential conversations with other world leaders?
I would say that, I think maybe for some people who aren't as quick on their feet, that they're a bit more scripted. I think that there are always points that you want to hit, and so you want those points in front of you. But, President Obama was a pretty, super intelligent guy, and so he would just get on the phone and chat with people, and sometimes it would be scheduled for 30 minutes, and it would be 90. And, he was, I think that, and I think that based on those transcripts that either President Trump has shredded those talking points or something. But I just have to say that thank God for Angela Merkel and that we should all hope that she's elected back into office and nothing bad ever happens to her. Because she's all we've got right now. And Trudeau. He's great too.
You mentioned Kirsten Gillibrand as somebody whose values you like, who you can see being a really good public servant, potential presidential candidate. Could you name some others?
Sure. Let's see. I think Kamala Harris is awesome. I've known her for a long time. Deval Patrick, we've known for a long time. I lived in Massachusetts for a while, and he's of the highest integrity. I think I love Al Franken. I think that he's because he came from Saturday Night Live, I think people somehow think that he couldn't be serious. Hopefully, given the president we have right now, that's not really a concern. But those would be like my top tier. I think Al Franken's awesome. And I worked for Bernie Sanders. He's what got me into politics, and so I have felt the burn since '94. Hi.
Hi. I just wanted to say thank you. I told my friends as we drove here that when I finished your book, I was kind of emotional, and I wasn't sure why. And I realized that it was the first relatable woman in a high position of power book that I'd ever read, and that hit me in a way that I wasn't expecting. So I'm 23, and I never really thought I'd go into politics, but we'll see what happens. So
that's awesome.
Thank you so much.
And that's why I wrote the book.
I'm sorry.
This is a bit of a silly question, but
There are no silly questions.
But we've heard so much kind of like how jealous Trump is of Obama, and that's the reason he's repealing all these regulations, everything. Do you think there's any truth to that? And what was the consensus in the White House when you were there?
So I would say the thing that, just being on the outside, not having any perspective on like what's really going on in there, it does seem that President Trump is uniquely focused on undoing everything we did for sport. It's like he hasn't thought about the things that we did. Like for him to say Obamacare should just implode is appalling. It's unpatriotic. Like there are people who depend on it. And so I do think that there's a bit of, when we were in the White House, President Bush did tons of stuff and we're like, oh, that was a good idea. We're going to keep it. But it seems like he's literally undone everything we've done just for sport, and it's a bummer.
Well, am I on?
No.
Am I on now?
Yeah.
Great panel.
Thank you. Thank you
so
guys
much.
for staying.
Alyssa is going to be signing books in the signing tent, and her books are for sale in the for sale tent. And thank you so much for sharing all of this real world experience in the White House. Our next person, if anybody was intrigued with Alyssa's comment about the DCCC's position, our next speaker in this tent is actually going to be speaking about abortion. So stick around.